All right, we are going to go in and finish chapter 8, and then we're going to start chapter 9. So the very last section is all about how things are transported across cell membranes. And what you kind of have to remember is that we have a semi-permeable membrane that's a barrier between our cells and their outside environment, right? So there are some things that we want to be able to go across the membrane without having anything there to help them. And a good example of that is oxygen, right? We want, when we take in a big deep breath of air, that oxygen enters our bloodstream, gets taken to whatever part of our body, and the oxygen moves over into the tissues and into the cells without having to be transported, because that would be a lot of energy to transport something that should just be able to be permeable. So how do we know if something is permeable? If something is really small, that's a good indication that it's probably able to diffuse across the barrier without any help. If it is non-polar, it can diffuse. So things that are small and non-polar, things like any of our diatomics, O2, N2, and then carbon dioxide, right? That's a waste product that our cells make all the time that we need to get rid of. And then something that's a little bit of an exception to the rule, it's small, but it's actually polar and it will diffuse, is water. Now, water does also have a pore that it will go through, and you can get water in and out of the cell a whole lot more quickly using the pore, but it will diffuse naturally. But just kind of remember, everything that can move from areas of high concentration will move to areas of low concentration, and that's just diffusion. And that's what we're seeing in this image here. Okay. So identify the type of transport. Passive diffusion. Think about if somebody is passive, they're not going to fight. They're not going to put up an effort, right? So passive diffusion is something that does not require energy. Does not require energy. Oop. And it just simply moves by diffusion. So just like we saw with the O2 molecules, the N2 molecules, the CO2, all of those are good examples of passive diffusion. Then you have facilitated transport. I like to think about facilitated transport as kind of like a tunnel through the cell membrane. And so things that are maybe larger, maybe they're very polar, they're not going to go across the membrane all by themselves. They need a little bit of help. And so the tunnel allows them to go through that membrane. And then active transport is something that requires energy, right? So this isn't a tunnel. Once the tunnel's made, the tunnel just sits there and you don't have to put any energy in to go make the tunnel work, right? It's just there. But with active transport, you actually have to put energy in. And I kind of think about this as like a ferry boat, right? In order to move the cars from one shore to another, that ferry boat is going to have to use its engines and it's going to require energy. So active transport. So this is usually a protein that helps this molecule get across the membrane, and it uses energy like in the form of ATP. So you need some kind of protein plus ATP for active transport. For facilitated transport, you need a tunnel protein, right? And it'll transport things that are larger or polar. And then passive diffusion, you don't need anything. It'll move all by itself. Okay, cholesterol, no energy required. Cholesterol is pretty non-polar. It has a little bit of a polar end sometimes, but for the most part, it's non-polar and relatively small. So those polar portions require that facilitated transport to get it across. So remember, we drew cholesterol, I don't know, a while back, but there's a portion of it that's non-polar and then a portion of it that's polar. And so that little portion of it that's polar requires that facilitated transport. Okay, nitrogen. Remember, nitrogen is one of those diatomics that exist as N2. And so N2 is one of those non-polar molecules that doesn't require anything. So this is actually passive diffusion. Okay, Cl minus, no energy required. Tell me about Cl minus. It is charged. So if I were to ask you, is it polar? It's more than polar. It is charged. Remember those kind of forces, right? And we talked about dipole interactions, and then we got to ion dipole, and then ionic interactions. And so these charged molecules are extremely polar because they're charged. So it's not going to get across all by itself. So it's not going to be passive diffusion, but it says no energy required. So this kind of tells us there's a tunnel. So that is facilitated diffusion. And then H plus, energy required. Anytime you see energy required, that is active transport. Okay, so just kind of go through the options and get comfortable with deciding which one it is. All right, now we're going to switch over to chapter 9. We only need to do sections 1 and 2 for today. So this chapter is all about acids, bases, and buffers. Oh my gosh, buffers are so important in the body. And so before we can talk about what a buffer is, you have to understand acids and bases. So if we talk about acids and bases, what is an acid? What is a base? If you have really low pH, then you have something that is an acid in that solution, right? So things that are acid taste very sour to us. So vinegar is an example of something that is acidic. And you know, vinegar, it tastes like pickles, you know, that's kind of sour taste, right? Citrus fruit, right? And then really in our stomachs, how do we digest food? One of the mechanical, chemical ways that we digest food is once we chew it up, right, and swallow it, and it goes down to our stomach squeezes it mechanically, but then you have a really, really, really low pH in your stomach, about pH of 2. And so we call that stomach acid. And that's why if you get acid reflux, when it comes up into your esophagus where you don't have cells that secrete mucus to protect those cells, then it burns, and that's like acid reflux. Okay, so then on the opposite side, if you have a high pH, then you have a base, right? And so a base, a lot of things that are soaps are bases. Your toothpaste is an example of something that's a base. And all these things are kind of slippery, right? They're slippery. That's kind of a common thing about bases. And we said acids are very sour, right? Like citric acid, very sour. Okay, so indicate if each of the following is a characteristic of an acid or of a base. Something that is neutralized by a base. When we talk about neutralization, that means that you're no longer an acid and you're no longer a base. And so what's really important is that you know the formula of, if I have a strong acid and I add a strong acid, maybe like hydrochloric acid, like HCl, and I add that to a strong base, maybe, for example, NaOH, right? If you've ever done any kind of lab in high school where you had hydrochloric acid and sodium hydroxide, and your teacher was like, don't pour it down the drain, I have to neutralize it. Well, what do? All you do is you add the two together, and you're going to make a salt plus water, right? You're not going to go around hitting anybody. It's not a salt, but it is a salt. So how do you get a salt from this? Well, it's just like a double displacement reaction, right? So you have sodium, that's a positive, right? Na plus, and then you have Cl over here, which is Cl minus. So if I combine these two, I get NaCl, right? And then what's left? Well, the only thing that's left is HOH. Well, what does HOH make? HOH makes water. So that's a neutralization reaction. So if I want to know what is neutralized by a base, so if this is the base, what is neutralized in this reaction with the base? Well, the answer to that is this strong acid. So something that is neutralized by a base is an acid. All right, produces OH minus in water. So if I have my NaOH, I told you this was a base. If it disassociates, we said that we get Na plus, and then what else is in this molecule? Well, OH. If the Na is a plus, what is the OH? It's a minus. So what produces OH minus in water? So all you have to do is say, I'm going to take a solid, I'm going to put it into water. Remember this, remember what happens is that the substance will disassociate. I guess it's too close together. See if I can bring it in, right? And put it right there. Okay. So it's just like the hydration things that we've talked about in the past. So what produces OH minus in water? That is a base. Okay, has a slippery feel. We talked about this. This was a base. This is like your toothpaste and your soap. Okay, donates a proton. What is a proton? A proton is just P plus, right? So if I have one proton, what element am I? If you look on the periodic table, number one, the very first element is hydrogen. So if I have something like HCl, right? Let's see if I can kind of erase some of this. If I have something that is HCl and I put it into water, what's going to happen? It's going to disassociate into H plus plus Cl minus. So why do we call it H plus? Well, because it's not a whole atom of hydrogen, it's an ion of hydrogen. So an ion has gained or lost an electron. If I tell you that in order to be hydrogen, you have to have one proton. If I tell you that the formula is H plus, how many electrons do I have in the hydrogen ion? Hydrogen ion. And the answer has to be 0 electrons, because if I had one, then it would be a +1 and a -1. And that would be 0. But here, the answer is a +1. That's the net charge. So you could call it a hydrogen ion, or you could call it a proton. It's the same thing. So what donates a proton or gives up a proton? And that would be an acid. Okay. All right. So, and that was kind of what 9.3 was about. In your own words, explain how a proton and the hydrogen ion represent the same thing. So we just talked about that. All right, so now, in our own words, explain how in an aqueous solution, H plus and H3O plus represent similar things. Well, when we talk about H3O plus, what is H3O plus? Well, that's really water and a hydrogen ion. And hydrogen ions don't actually exist in solution. We talk about them like they do, but they don't. What really exists is the hydronium ion, which is H3O plus. So water is a polar molecule, right? So why does this happen? Water's polar. We already know that. We have this molecule with 2 lone pairs. We have a partially negative, partially positive, partially positive. And so that polarity attracts a positively charged anything, right? And so our hydrogen ion is going to interact with water via a dipole, an ion dipole interaction, right? And so it's so strong. This attraction ends up being so strong that it actually forms a covalent bond with water. And so you actually end up getting something that looks really funky, but it looks like this, right? And so this molecule carries an overall +1 charge. So if I take these two things and I put them together, I'm going to make this. And so overall, this entire molecule is going to carry a +1 charge. So You just have to remember hydrogen ions don't exist in solution really, because water is polar. We have H3O plus. Okay, here. All right. In each of our following reactions, identify the reactant that is an acid. So an acid is a H plus donor, which means it gives up a hydrogen ion. And the reactant that is the base, that's an H plus acceptor. So this one picks up an H plus. So let's look at that. If we look at our very first reaction here, let's try a different color. All right, we have H3PO4. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to underline HP3O4. Then I'm going to go look in the product side and I'm going to find what looks the most similar to H3PO4. And so when I look over here, I have H2PO4 minus and H3O plus. So which one looks as close to my original underlying reactant? And it's this one. So I'm going to draw myself a little arrow, maybe a little arrow, so that I can start to see what's happening. So when I look at this, H3PO4 and H2PO4 minus. So what happened to this substance? Well, I had 3 hydrogens here. I have 2 hydrogens here. So this substance has lost, right? It's lost a hydrogen, and not only just a hydrogen, it's lost an H plus because it started out as neutral, and now, because there's no charge here, and now it's carrying a negative charge. So I know I must have lost not only a hydrogen, but also a positive charge. So this is my hydrogen donor, H plus donor, right? So if that's my H plus donor, which one is my acid? This is my acid right here. So whichever one is actually giving up the hydrogen ion becomes the donor. Okay, so then let's try another one. We look at this substance and we say, okay, this is the one that it's closest to, and I want to know what happens when I go from one to the next. Well, I went from H2O to H3O plus. So here I have gained an H plus. So we call this the H plus acceptor. So the molecule that actually does the accepting, I'll do that, is actually the base. Okay, so it's all about identifying the acid and the base. All right. Oh, I really do want this, but I'm going to move it over here. Not putting it on anything. Yeah. All right. So here we go. Here's another one. PO4 3 minus. So I'm going to go on the other side and I'm going to say, okay, what looks as similar as possible to that? And that's my HPO4 2 minus. So I'm going to draw a little arrow and I'm going to say, what is happening here? So if I look, I start out with PO4 3 minus. I've gained a hydrogen and I've lost a negative charge. Another way to say losing a negative charge is gaining a positive. So what happened to this substance? This one has gained a hydrogen ion. So this is my H plus acceptor, right? And so what do we call our H plus acceptor? We call this one a base. Okay, switch colors and hint, hint, hint. If one thing's a base, the other has to be the acid. So let's say why it's an acid. I went from H2O to OH minus. So what's happening here? The water is actually donating or giving up or losing hydrogen ion because I have 2 hydrogens here, I only have 1 here. So this is the one that is the H plus donor. And we call that H plus donor the acid. Okay. So remember when you're doing acids and bases, we talk about the strength of acids and bases in terms of how much it disassociates in water. So if it is a reversible reaction, it's a weak acid or base. So remember, we talked about that with this double-sided arrow. If it's a double-sided arrow, it's a weak acid or base. If it is a single arrow, this is a strong acid or base. And so you could go through and try to memorize a list. You could look on your best friend. Your best friend has the 6 common strong acids. And then you can also remember a couple of little mnemonic devices that will help you get through exams a little more quickly. So if you look at the rules for strong acids, so for strong acids right here, there are 2 kinds of strong acids. There are binary acids. So here we have 3 examples of binary acids. Binary meaning we have 2 different elements. So here we have hydrogen and iodine. Here we have hydrogen and bromine. Here we have hydrogen and chlorine. So only 2 elements. And if you remember the little mnemonic device, I bring clay, HI, HBr, HCl are all of our 3 strong acids that are binary. The other acids are called tertiary acids, and our tertiary acids are the ones that have 2 more. So these are, let me erase this, tertiary acids have 2 more oxygens than hydrogens. So look at each of our examples here. So if I look here, I'm looking at my hydrogens and my oxygens. So I have 4 oxygens to 1 hydrogen. Do I have 2 more? Well, yeah, I have 3 more here. So that checks out as a strong acid. H2SO4, I have 4 oxygens to 2 hydrogens. I have 2 more oxygens than hydrogens, check. HNO3, here I have 4 oxygens and 1 hydrogen. That's a check. So these are all examples of strong acids. You could look at other ones and you could see that they don't, like, for example, H3, H3PO4. Here I have 4 oxygens and I have 3 hydrogens. D. So I have 1 more oxygen than hydrogen, so it is not strong. So it's just a good example. Okay, so then when we talk about strong, okay, so let's go answer our strong acids and then we'll talk about strong bases. So which of the following are strong acids? I don't see any binary ones. So that was kind of sad, but let's look at the hydrogens and the oxygens without looking at our little list. We have 1 hydrogen here and we have 2 oxygens. So our requirement is we need 2 more oxygens than hydrogen. Here, I only have 1 more oxygen than hydrogen. So this is something that is weak. Okay. Here, again, I have that same 1 hydrogen, but here I have 3 oxygens. So I have 2 more oxygens than hydrogen. So this one would be strong because we're asked which ones are. So we're going to go ahead and circle that one. H3PO4, I have here 3 hydrogens and I have 4 oxygens. So that tells me I have 1 more oxygen than hydrogen, and this would be weak. Okay, not too bad. All right, which of the following are strong bases? And strong bases are those group 1 and a lot in group 2. The group 2 ones are mostly strontium and barium, right? But, oh, not Br, Ba. So look at these, and we have here magnesium and oxygen. So go look on the periodic table. So our strong ones are really group 1, strontium and barium. So is magnesium in group 1 or strontium or barium? No, it's in group 2, but it's not strontium. So we're going to call this a weak base. Okay, NaOH. Na, sodium, is in group 1, right? So we know that that one is going to be strong. And then iron, FeOH3, this one is a transition metal. So not in group 1, not in group 2. So this one is a weak base. That's my abbreviation. This is weak base, weak acid, strong, what did I say? Strong base, strong acid. Those are my abbreviations. You'll see that over and over and over again. Okay. So remember how I kind of said that you can look at the different strong and weak and tell, does it completely disassociate in water? And disassociate means turn into ions. So does it completely break apart? Whoa. In water. Okay, so LiOH. LiOH is a group 1. So group 1 is a strong acid. So that's going to go all the way to completion. So if I were to draw that out, that would be LiOH. And LiOH is going to go to Li plus OH minus. So it's going to be an arrow going in just the forward direction. So this is a strong base, strong acid. Y'all, strong base, right? Because it has the OH here. That tells me that it's a base. So I'm going to circle it here. Okay, water. What we saw up above is that water can act to accept a hydrogen ion or to donate one. And it doesn't do it completely. And so if I were to draw that reaction in either way, I would use this double-sided arrow. So this one is a weak acid, or it could be a weak base. But the question is, will it completely ionize in water? No. Okay, benzoic acid. Any acid with carbon is weak. So here, this, I'm told that it's an acid and it has carbon in it, weak. So this would be the hydrogen that would come off if I wrote this equation out, H5COOH, right? And I put it into water. What would happen? I would get C6H5COO minus plus H plus. But I have this double-sided arrow, so this is going to be another weak. So is it going to completely ionize? No. So the only one that was a complete ionization was A, because it is a strong base. Okay. We have to be able to name acids. So you have to go from the formula to the name, and then you have to be able to go from the name to the acid. So remember when you are doing this that there are 2 kinds of acids. We have binary acids. So when we name a binary, what we say is that a binary acid, we always start it with hydro, and then it's going to be some element. So I'm just going to put a box there, some element, and we're going to add IC space. So this is one word, hydro something ic acid, right? So if this were chlorine, this would be hydrochloric acid. If it were bromine, hydrobromic acid. So this is whatever element that you're talking about in the binary acid. Then when we have tertiary, they have a slightly different naming system. And all you have to remember is either I went to chemistry class and I got 8 ic-itis, or you could say I ate a humongous bite. Either way, this works, because when we look here, this ATE and this IC are together, and then the OUS and the ITE are together. Okay, and it's an E on there. All right, so if you look at the rules, right, and this comes from a table here, if you have something that ends in ATE, so if it ends in ATE, to name the acid, you're going to give the anion name minus ATE, and instead you're going to put IC. So ATE swaps for IC. if it ends in ITE, it's going to end in OUS. If it's from the periodic table, that tells you it's a binary acid, and you're going to put hydroic acid, you know. Okay, so let's look at some examples. So we have iodide, that's the iodide ion, right? So this is just iodine, and then we need to make the acid. So in order to make the acid, all you have to do is add H plus to it. And so what are we going to get? We're going to get H plus and I minus, the charges swap, right? So you're going to get HI. This is only 2 elements, so it is a binary acid. So we're going to use this little naming system: hydro, the element, and then ic acid. So this is hydroiodic. That's really one word. I shouldn't have a gap there. Hydroiodic, and then a space, acid. Whoa. Hydroiodic acid. Okay, now perchlorate, if it ends in ATE, then it's on the polyatomic ion table. So I might make you go and get it off the polyatomic ion table, but you can do that. So in order to make it an acid, you add an H plus, and that will give us HClO3. So if it's an acid, usually the hydrogen goes on the front or goes on the back. But there are kind of some rules to which one goes, but it doesn't really matter. All right, so this is a tertiary acid. And so if my polyatomic ion ends in ATE, I'm going to end the acid in IC. So this one, if we go and look at our polyatomic, you'll see it's perchlorate, but we're going to write perchlor. Instead of ATE, we're going to write IC and then acid. So HClO3 is perchloric acid. The acetate ion, we're going to add H plus to it. We're going to make CH3COO. And instead of being a minus there, because we're adding an H plus, it's just going to be an H. So this one, if we go and look it up, it ends in ATE. So we're going to swap that for IC. So this is acetic acid. Okay. All right. So now we're going to work on neutralization reactions. And neutralization reactions, remember we said you're going to add a strong base and a strong acid, and you're going to make a salt and water. And then you just have to make sure that they are balanced. So here's A. I'm going to have HNO3 aqueous plus MgOH2 solid. So what's going to happen with this? Well, let's kind of look at it. Remember we said it's kind of like a double displacement, where I know I'm going to have water being made and then a salt. So the red highlighted is going to be my water. And let's do a blue highlighted. We're going to have a positive magnesium and a negative NO3. So let's go ahead and write those together. So if you look at water, we can add that in first. So we know we're going to make H2O. And then we're also going to make the things in blue. Now be careful, whenever you're writing salts, right? You always write your positive, then you write your negative. So the one that comes first, right, is always going to be positive. This is going to be positive. That's going to be negative as ions. So the magnesium, if we look, magnesium, go look on the periodic table. What's your charge on magnesium? Magnesium is a group 2, so it's a +2. NO3, if we look up that, that's going to be a -1. So now we need to crisscross them. Oh, and we need to, let me move it over, right? Because we need positives and then negatives. So we're going to crisscross them and do this, right? So we're going to 1 here and a 2 here. So be careful about your parentheses. We're going to get MgNO3 2. So I'm going to put this here, MgNO3 2. So we've made water and a salt. Cool, right? A positive and negative. Now, what else do we need to do? We need to balance it. And if you just kind of want to remember this MgNO3, These were the substances that were in blue, and these were the ones in red, so that you can kind of see where that came from. Okay, so we need to balance it. How in the world do we need to balance it? I kind of like to look at the water, and I can see over here I needed 2 OHs. So I'm going to need to put 2 hydrogens here because I have 2 OHs. So I'm going to have 2 hydrogens, and then that's going to give me 2 waters. And then if I look at everything else, I have 2 NO3 minus. I have 2 of them here because it's a coefficient. Magnesium, I only have 1. Magnesium, I only have 1, and it looks good. So that's just kind of a way that you can quickly balance things. Okay, so let me erase some of this so we have room to do our next one. So B, we have HCl aqueous plus NaHCO3 solid. Okay, and so we see that these are just one forward arrow. So we know that these are strong acids and strong bases that are neutralized. Weak acids and weak bases are a little different. You can really only neutralize with strong acids and strong bases. So if we look here, what's going to happen is that we are going to take a hydrogen from the chlorine. We're going to make something else. Here you got to go, wait a minute, I can't just make water, right? Something else is going to be made. Well, I have this carbon containing substance here. So anytime you see a neutralization reaction and you have some kind of carbon substance, this is a really great trick to know, is that you're going to make, in addition to a salt, let's do it in this direction, water, you're going to make water, you're going to make a salt, but you're also going to make carbon dioxide. So what is carbon dioxide? Carbon and 2 oxygens. And this is a gas. Ooh, I did not put my states of matter. I'm so bad. Water's a liquid. MgNO3 2 is going to be aqueous. Okay. I got them every place else. Yeah. Okay. So now I'm going to make water. So I'm going to take one of the oxygens from here. So that, right, is going to go to water. This hydrogen is going to go to water, and then this hydrogen is going to go to water. So I'm going to make HOH or H2O. Okay, so that's my red. Now what's left? Well, what's left is chlorine and sodium. When chlorine and sodium get together, we're actually going to start out with Na, and we're going to add Cl. Na is a +1, Cl is minus, so you get NaCl. So our salt is NaCl. Water is a liquid, and then our salt here is going to be aqueous because it's in water, AQ. So the last thing is it balanced? And if you double check it, yes, it is balanced, and we are good. All right, last one. Complete and balance the following neutralization. So just another one, just like that. And it's not too bad, just take it one step at a time. So A is H2SO4. It's terrible S. So 4. And this is aqueous plus NaOH solid. And so what are we going to form from this? Well, let's see. Let me think about this. I know I'm going to make some water. So let's pull out the water. Oh, so I'm got 2 hydrogens and 1 OH. So I'm probably not going to be balanced, but that's okay. We're going to check that in a minute. So we said we're going to make water and we're going to make a salt. So our water is going to be H2O, and that's where my hydrogens and my oxygens went. And then what do I have left? Oops. So I have an Na, and then I have an SO4. So my Na, if I look at my Na should be a +1, and then my SO4, just remember you're putting positives and negatives. My SO4, what's the charge on SO4? And it should be a 2 minus or -2. And so if I cross them over, right, I'm going to get a 2 there and a 1 there. So I would get Na2SO4. So that's what I'm going to put over here for my salt. Na2SO4 aqueous. So we'll highlight that in blue because that's my blue things that got together. All right, now you should check, is it balanced? And when you do check it, you should say, oh, no, it's not balanced. And so what I like to do is I like to say, okay, I'm going to check my water first. I'm making one molecule, but here I had 2 hydrogens and here I had 2. Ooh, I did not have 2. I had 1 hydroxyl, so that's a problem. So in order to get that, I need to put a 2 here. So I have 2 hydroxyls, and then I'm going to make 2 HOHs, right? Because those are going to come together. And then check your other substances. Okay, let me kind of erase that. So then check your other substances. Is everything else balanced? And you just need to put a 2 right there in front of water because you made 2 water molecules. Okay, B, last one. We have HBr aqueous plus LiOH solid. And what are we going to form? Oh, and I didn't yell. Okay, so that's an I, that's Li. All right, so I know I'm going to make water. So let me do that in red, just like I always do. I'm going to have H and OH. So I'm going to make H2O, and that's a liquid, so I don't forget. And that's my red. Then what do I have left? I have Br and Li. So I'm going to start with my lithium because that is positive. So what's the charge on lithium? +1. What's the charge on bromine? -1. Crisscross them. 1 and 1. So you just don't write it. It's LiBr. So LiBr, and that is aqueous. So that's our blue stuff. So check your equation. Are you balanced? And yes, you are. You are good to go. I hope you all have a great day, and we'll put 9.3 on Thursday.